So it feels like everything that you studied and you've learned and all the worldviews that you've had that have evolved, all kind of pointed to this world of Bitcoin, where you've discovered a thing that's like, okay, now there is a thing that can actually perhaps solve some of these problems that I've seen in the world. Almost like, is it a case of the Bitcoin was the eureka moment that therefore gave you the kind of direction for this to be like your life's work? And I know that sounds all profound, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, and like my story is a bit unique kind of in the concourse of that, because like, you know, I was pretty early on, and like when I like took the orange pill, it was like a very insane moment for me, where like I like took like a bunch of, you know, like unsecured debt that like I didn't have, and I just like longed that into Bitcoin like an insane person.
Love it.
And I had family members and people that were like pretty concerned, and they're like, hey, like we know you're doing like weird gambling stuff. We're like really concerned because like you're just coming out of like a pretty crippling depression and like you don't have any money. And I was talking to my wife at the time, and she was just like, look, like I don't know if this is going to work for you or not. She was like, but two things I do know. One is that like we don't have this money anyways. So like if you lose it all, like what? Like we're bankrupt? Like we already are bankrupt. She was like, two, like if this does work, you will hate yourself for the rest of your life, and like that will destroy you, and that like you missed your boat. So she was like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but
do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So just like smash by. And then it just like kind of worked out kind of serendipitously that like I'd been applying to Coinbase, and did a couple of interviews, didn't get them. But then like Olaf kind of called me up freaking out, and he was like, hey man, like we're scaling hard. Like, did you want in? And I was like, yeah, like let's set up another interview. He was like, oh no, like you're like hired. We're like going to send you a machine right away. Like just like start working now. It's like, okay.
Olaf Carson Wee?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, you say pretty early on you smash by, but like there's a reality with Bitcoin. Once you've done a cycle of 5-6 years, you care less about the gains. It becomes different. I think almost every person I've met, it's become more about meaning. It's like, okay. And I don't know if that's because like maybe they've got themselves into a financial position where there's less fear, right? I've done a cycle, I've smashed ball, you know, I'm in a better, comfortable financial position. I've got breathing room, right? Or it's because you go down all these other rabbit holes and you're like, oh, the world's completely fucked, and I've got this thing that can maybe just make the world a bit better. I think I need to do that. I'm not sure which it is. Maybe it's a combination of the two.
Well, I think they operate dynamically with each other, because like you like have this thing, it like goes up, you know, like 100%, 200%. You're like, oh my God, I just made a life-changing amount of money. And like now it goes up another 200, 300%. And you're like, okay, like now this is becoming like a lot more money than I ever thought it was. And instead of you just being like sell immediately, you're like, maybe I'm like missing something here. Like maybe this is actually like more valuable than just like gold on the internet or something. And as you start researching it more, you're like, there's like this really interesting thing of cryptography in it. Like, why is it using this artistry of warfare to like protect its communications? Like, that's really weird. You know, and like as you essentially go farther and farther down the rabbit hole, you learn that a lot of the stuff that you were taught at, you know, school and university, not only is it not true, but it's kind of like the opposite of the truth.
Yeah.
And there's like a bunch of stuff like that. And then you start connecting all over the line. You're like, what if this like Keynesian thing is like all wrong? Like what if that like the state monetary theory of money is actually just like this horrific apparatus used to like generally steal from populations and then redistribute it for purposes of war? That's no good. And like and then it just keeps continuing farther and farther and farther until you're like pretty far down the rabbit hole, and you're like talking to your like family and friends about conspiracies about keeping people away from sunlight and other things. And then you're like, oh no, I'm one of these people now.
Well, it's a really fine line to walk, and I actually try and walk it really delicately.
You actually do an incredible job out of kind of everybody. And like that's why I think you have like a pretty popular podcast, because you can engage with insane people like me and be like, okay, like you're pretty crazy, but like there's some interesting stuff here.
Yeah, well, so look, if I'm going to try and orange pill my friends next week, this is not the show I send them.
Yeah, like don't like if somebody's like, I got this new book called Crypto Sovereignty on Bitcoin, I think it's like take it away from them and be like, you can have this back after your next cycle.
Yeah, this is a luxury for us and the Bitcoiners who sat through a bear market, who want some entertainment, want to learn something, want to go a bit deeper. But there's this really fine line to walk, twofold. Firstly, though we share a language, British people are very different from Americans. And if I act like like some of the Americans I know, especially the people in Republican states, people are going to think I'm insane. I'm going to get, and I'm just not the same anyway. But also, I want to orange pill as many people as possible. So I want to get those like gentle introductions. I want them to understand like this is inflation and this is why you need to think about it, not what everybody's learned 4 or 5 years down the rabbit hole, like avoiding sunshine, only eating meat, and destruction of the state, and we're all going to be anarchists living a voluntary life. Because that's too far. It's also too far for me.
Sure.
I'm fucking 6 years in with this podcast, and that's still too big a leap for me. I'm still in the world where, confession time, I think the state is a natural monopoly and it's going to be here. So I like want to work within it and improve life. Like I'm still there, but it's a very hard line to walk. I've no question with that. It's just a statement.
I mean, I think all that line's pretty good, and I can understand why like you're not an anarchist and you still think the state is a necessary apparatus.
Oh, no, not a necessary. That's a different point because there's two arguments. There's a natural monopoly.
Okay.
I think if you destroy the state, it rebuilds itself in one way or another. So if you had the big red button, suddenly government's gone, people are going to organize themselves into groups. And once they've organized themselves into groups, they're going to also organize themselves into bigger groups to protect themselves from other groups. And then in doing so, they're going to have to elect a council of leaders. And I think you always end up rebuilding the state. I think there is a natural formation of the state. Ideally, it's just a smaller, less violent one all the time. So I just think it's natural. What I do is in accepting it, I want to use it to make the world a better place.
I can accept that.
You don't have to accept that. You can say, fuck you, your state is cut.
Well, so what I just want to point out again is like similar to the term of war, the state's kind of one of these confusing things. Because like we had something that we could call a state that occurred before 1648, which was when the Treaty of Westphalia was. And that's when we got like the modern nation state, was after the 30 Years' War. But before that, like the state was this sort of weird apparatus of like overlapping sovereignty. And like that's what the Holy Roman Empire was that like, you could think of it like as like a pretty loose federal republic. And my idea is that like, look, if we can beat back the contemporary nation state as we understand it and the apparatus that it uses to finance and create itself vis-a-vis fiat money, like this thing can atrophy and fall apart.
Yeah.
And like my gigantic dream is more or less to like each nation state today that's federated in such a way has a number of states underneath it. I want to radicalize those states underneath it to fight their own federal government. Because the thing is that whether it is, what is it in the UK? Is it's not states, is it? Is it?
We have counties, but they're all the same laws. You've got some devolution of power across the United Kingdom between Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and England. They can set certain different rules. For example, they can't. I don't think they can have different taxation, but they can spend their budgets differently. I think higher education is still free in Scotland. There's things so they can set different laws, but they have. There's been a lot of talk of devolution of power. I don't know the county level or city level, but I know maybe regional. I know the North often feels like London gets all the benefits of the country and they will like devolve power. But essentially, we don't have a republic. We have one country, one set of rules.
Yeah, and what I see is that whether it's like counties or states or even cities, like there's a totally new methodology that we can use to create a political form that because of our current structure, like we can't actualize or try to make those new systems. And so like as an anarchist, part of what I believe is that like we have to tear down the nation state, one, to, help make sure that humanity on a whole isn't endangered by this insane apparatus. But two is so that we can actually create the space to allow for the building of what comes after this. And the other thing I was going to point out is that like on a whole, it generally seems that like state, county, city governments are usually actually like relatively decent bureaucratic apparatus. It tends to be these federal nation states that have created these deep state programs and these like military counterintelligence programs that like this seems to be all of the really bad stuff.
Yeah.
And it seems like in the Republican model that is supposed to be the United States, like states are supposed to arrest federal authority around this. But really since 1865, like we've sort of lived in this sort of weird territory in the United States where, like, it's not clear if the 10th Amendment actually has any substantial meaning.
What's the 10th Amendment?
10th Amendment is that anything that is not enumerated to the federal government in the Constitution directly is supposed to be reserved for the states. But as we've seen over the last, 150 years, it's pretty radically different from that.